Internet! Today I want to talk about Diversity Bingo 2017. If you don't know what Diversity Bingo 2017 is, it's kind of a reading challenge for the year of 2017 that deals with reading different diverse books. There is a bingo sheet which looks like this. This is a spread I've made about it in my journal, and it has 36 squares and each one has kind of a topic, some kind of diverse topic, and the idea, is to, get bingos or fill it up or whatever your personal goal is for this particular reading challenge. I personally hope to completely fill up the sheet by the end of the year. So we'll see how that goes, but a lot of people filmed TBR videos for Diversity Bingo at the beginning of the year, but that's not really the way that I personally approach reading challenges. Usually the way when I do a certain kind of reading challenge, I just kind of read books that I know will fit into some kind of topic, and then after it's read I decide what I want to count it toward. So like for this particular reading challenge, I'm reading the books that I know are diverse in some way, and then after I've read them, I'm looking at the bingo sheet and thinking, okay, so which square do I want to count it towards, and then I'm checking it off. Obviously, whenever I get fewer and fewer squares down, I'm going to have to focus my reading a little more and not really take this approach, but this is just kind of how I personally am approaching it at this particular time since it's still early on. And because of that, I didn't want to do a TBR video for it, but instead I decided that I'm going to do quarterly check-ins on my channel. So every 3 months, I'm going to talk about the books that I read for Diversity Bingo in that 3-month time period and what squares they went towards, and kind of documenting my progress towards this throughout the year. So this is the first one in March, there'll be one in June, there'll be one in September, and then one at the end of the year. And also whenever I do my check-ins, I'm also planning on going through some of these squares that I don't really know of any books that will work towards that and ask for recommendations. And so I'm going to pick different ones each time to ask for recommendations for, because there are some squares on here where I don't know of a book that fits it, and I would love to hear recommendations for that. So anyway, I'm going to get into the books now. I'm not going to tell a whole lot about the synopsis of the book because I have already talked about all these books in my wrap-up, so I'm going to link all 3 of my monthly wrap-ups down below so you can check those out. My March one is going to go up after this video, so as soon as that goes up, I'll link it down there as well. But anyway, I'm going to get into it. I'm going to go down the rows vertically and talk about what square it was, what the book was that I went for that square, what month I read it, and a brief synopsis. So that's kind of what I'm planning. So let's start with row number 1. For romance with a trans main character, I read If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo back in January. And this was a pretty good book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, I believe. And this is about a trans girl named Amanda who is starting over at a new school because things didn't really go very well at her last school, and this is kind of her chance to kind of start over, and she's kind of dealing with the idea of does she want to, tell people she's trans, and it also has some flashbacks from her transition period and that kind of thing. I really liked this book. I loved how the author left a note in the back for her readers. She wrote a note for cisgendered readers and a note for trans readers. I thought that was really great. So this is what I read for that square. Continuing on down row 1, for a main character of color in a sci-fi fantasy novel, I read The Wrath of the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh, and this is a retelling of 1001 Nights. It's kind of about this prince who every day he marries someone, and then at the dawn of the next day he kills his wife, and our main character, Shahrazad, decides to willingly give herself up to marry this guy because she wants to get revenge for him killing one of her best friends. It was pretty good. I did have some issues with some things, but I ended up overall enjoying it. I gave it 4 stars, and I can't remember if I said this or not, but I read this back in January. For a book with a West Asian setting, I read The Rose and the Dagger by Renee Ahdieh, which is the sequel and the conclusion to the Wrath and the Dawn duology. I read this in March and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. For an Own Voices Black main character, I read The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead and ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. This story is kind of about, what if the Underground Railroad was an actual railroad, and so we follow a slave named Cora who is trying to escape. And I read this back in February. And those are all the books I read that go down the first row. I haven't read any that count towards any of the squares in the second row yet, so I'm skipping ahead to the third row. In the third row for my free choice book, I read History Is All You Left Me by Adam Silvera. I read this in March and I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5 stars. In this book, we follow Griffin, who has just recently lost his ex-boyfriend. His ex-boyfriend has died, and we follow kind of what's happening in present day and the history between him and his ex-boyfriend Theo. And the only person that can really comfort Griffin in this time is Theo's current boyfriend Jackson. And so we kind of follow, you know, present day and the past, and I really, really loved this book. I thought it was a fantastic look at grief, and you could just tell that it was written from a very honest place, a very personal place. For a person of color on the cover, I read The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and so far this is my favorite book that I've read this year. I read it in March and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I would be surprised if you hadn't heard about this book yet. It was inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's about Star, who has witnessed her childhood best friend get shot by a police officer, and since she is the sole witness, it's kind of her journey trying to deal with that. It's also very much a contemporary story. We have cute romance scenes, there's a great family dynamic in this. Star's kind of a nerd, there's some, you know, Harry Potter references and High School Musical and just like fun stuff like that, but it's also a very, very serious book. I think it dealt with everything just so beautifully. This book has been #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for the last 4 weeks, and it is definitely deserved. If you haven't read this yet, out of all the books on this list, I think I highly recommend this one the most. Moving along to the 4th row for bisexual main character own voices, I read Our Own Private Universe by Robin Talley. This book is about 15-year-old Aki, who is kind of discovering that she's bisexual. She's kind of had the idea that she might be, but in this book you go through her journey of discovering that she is, and it takes place on a church mission trip, which was interesting. I did have some issues with this book, but I overall did enjoy it. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I read it back in February. On to the 5th row. For main character with an invisible disability, I read More Happy Than Not by Adam Silvera. I read this back in January and gave it 4 stars. I didn't enjoy this one as much as History Is All You Left Me, but I still think that it was a really good novel. This is a contemporary story with kind of a sci-fi element to it. At this point in time, there is a procedure called the Letio procedure, I think, that basically they can alter your brain to make you forget something. And so this book is about Aaron Soto, who in this book he kind of discovers that he's gay, and through some of the events that happen in this book, he wants to have the procedure in order to forget that he's gay. This is also an Own Voices story, and that the author Adam Silvera is also gay. And like I said, I didn't enjoy it as much as History, but I still thought this was a really good book. And the last book for this particular video is for the Own Voices category, and I read Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst, and this is basically about Princess Denalea, who has been betrothed to a prince from another kingdom for forever. She goes to his kingdom to start planning their wedding, and she ends up falling in love with the prince's sister Mare. And this book was great. There was a lot of LGBT representation in it, not just with the 2 main characters, but with other characters as well, but they never really identified as anything in particular. It was just a very common thing in this world, which I really, really appreciated. And this is actually Audrey Coulthurst's debut novel, and I thought it was really great. This is another one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I read it back in January. So like I said, if you want more of my in-depth thoughts on any of those books, I will link all of my wrap-ups down in the description, as well as any reviews that I have for those books. I think I only have one, which is for Of Fire and Stars, so I'll link that in the description as well. But now I want to ask for recommendations for a couple of different categories. So I almost have a bingo down the first row. I have 2 squares left. Main character with an underrepresented body, which I have a couple of ideas for. Within the square for an Own Voices Indigenous main character, I don't have any ideas for, so I would love some recommendations for that square. Kind of going across this way, I also am halfway to being in a bingo, and I have 3 squares left, but the only one I don't really have any ideas for is the square in the 6th row for a main character with chronic pain. I'm sure there are a lot of books out there that would fit this, but I would like for it to be a really accurate portrayal, like an Own Voices book with a main character with chronic pain. So I would love some recommendations for that one as well. Another one that I would really love recommendations for is in the 5th row, which is a book set in Central America. I would love some recommendations for that one as well. Obviously there are other ones that I would want recommendations for, but I don't want to throw them all in this video. Those are just kind of the ones that I would like recommendations for now. So please, if you have any recommendations for those, leave them in the comments, or really just diverse books in general that would work for Diversity Bingo, leave those in the comments, because I'm always open to having more recommendations, even for squares that I have ideas for. If you are participating in Diversity Bingo, let me know in the comments what books you've read so far. And yeah, I've read 9 books so far out of the 36 that I need to, so I think I'm doing pretty good. I'm on track, so that's good. And I can't wait to see what I read in the next 3 months whenever I film another check-in. So that will be it for this video, and I will see you guys next time with another video.